Now, the thing is, both types, they have the ability to go to the same level of intensity. Real quick, I want y'all to say hi to Simba, the kitten I rescued. He crawled up in my engine one day, and it took like 5 people to help me get him out. I've had him for a couple months now. He's gotten a lot bigger. When I first had him, he's about half this size, so maybe even less than half this size. But I'm going to put him down. I think he want to get out of there. But anyways, topic of the day. I notice a lot of people having trouble telling the difference between ESTP and ESFP. This kind of goes into my other video I made where I was talking about how people have trouble telling the difference between thinking and feeling. It kind of will tie into that a little bit, but more specifically, ESTP and ESFP. The thing is, though, like a lot of people have trouble telling them apart, but really, they're not really that hard to tell apart in many instances. Now, there are some instances where you'll see the extroverted sensing, but then it's really hard to tell whether they're ESFP or ESTP. But there are those instances, of course. But many instances, they're not really that hard to tell apart. People just don't know what to look for, and they kind of go off of surface level things as far as differences between feeling and thinking. So first, let me start off. I'm just going to kind of talk about differences that I can think of off the top of the head to help y'all out. Because this shouldn't be something we get wrong so often. I see this happen when people try to type fictional characters. People will type obvious ESTP as an ESFP and stuff like that. I see it with celebrities. But anyways, so first off, you want to talk about ESFPs versus ESTPs. ESTPs are almost always going to take on now, maybe you could say this is more of a toxic ESTP, but maybe not always because it's more of a persona. Um, ESTPs are almost always going to take on the persona of the douchebag, asshole kind of guy. They embrace that type of. Um, they're almost always going to try to embrace that sort of thing because they're just polarizing. That's the main difference. ESTPs are very polarizing people. They're a lot more polarizing than ESFPs are. Intentionally polarized. I'm not saying ESFPs can't be polarizing, but they're not like necessarily thinking about trying to be polarizing. ESTPs more so get a kick out of getting a rise out of people than ESFPs do. So that causes them, they might take on that persona of being the douchebag, asshole. They like the attention they get from that. They don't mind being looked at as that. You know what I'm saying? Uh, I mean, that can go in a good way or a bad way, of course. I mean, it sounds bad on the surface, but it's not always used for wrong, but for bad. It's more so can be used as more of a joke, not something they take very seriously type of thing. The thing is, they can like being looked at as that way because I think to them, at least you're not looking at them as they're soft or something like that. I feel like that gives them a little bit. I think that might be why they like it because it makes people not look at them as soft or makes people less likely to want to take advantage of them. I think that might be why. But anyways, ESFPs on the other hand, they're not going to necessarily go enjoy being looked at as the douchebag asshole necessarily. That's because they have introverted feeling. Introverted feeling gives a little bit more of a moral compass. They have a certain set of morals and things like that they want to live up to, depending on them as an individual. So they might not necessarily look to be that douchebag. Now, if you want to talk about the negative view of an ESFP, they were more likely to be on the side of being viewed as like shallow. They don't really mind being viewed as shallow and things like that, and even dumb. Usually, they're not as dumb as people think they are, but they don't mind being viewed as dumb. So in that way, it's similar to the ESTP. Um, but yeah, that's the difference right there. If you want to talk about being viewed negatively, so both types kind of like attention. I'm not saying all the time. This is maybe like an immature version. Yeah, this is maybe like the less mature side of each. Now, if you got a mature version of both types, they're not going to want to be looking to be viewed in that way because it's going to be more of a thing like, oh, I've been there, done that. It's not all it's cracked up to be. But I think they always go through a phase where they don't mind it. At least at the very least, they usually don't mind. It's not necessarily that they always embrace either one, try to embrace that. Um, but they wouldn't mind it as much as far as that. Um, so yeah, that's like more on the toxic side of them. I use that to kind of differentiate. But even then, I wouldn't even call it toxic because both of those are not necessarily. I don't know because they use it to their advantage. You know what I'm saying? At the same time, anyways, that's like a difference. Like even if let's say if they're not really that, like they're not leaning into that, but like ESTP, like so for example, ESTPs are viewed as assholes. ESFPs can be viewed as um, maybe more like let's say if the negative view of them will be shallow. Now, if you want to talk about outside of that, those are kind of like in a way those are kind of stereotypes. So I'm going to talk about outside of that though. So as far as the functions go, a lot of times people will see ESTPs and they seem expressive and they seem emotional, and they'll think, "Hey, okay, that's an ESFP. They're pretty emotional, right?" No, ESTPs can sometimes be seen as more emotional than ESFPs. Why? Because they have tertiary extroverted feeling. Now, when it comes to tertiary extroverted feeling in them, their tertiary extroverted feeling sometimes can be a little bit less mature as far as the feeling function. So a lot of times, ESTPs may not have as much emotional maturity early on. I say they do tend to develop a lot of emotional maturity later, but sometimes they may not have as much emotional maturity early on in life as the ESFP does. ESFPs can become very emotionally mature at a young age. You know what I'm saying? Now, at the same time, ESFPs can also be seen as somewhat childish. So that's a whole nother thing though. But not like necessarily when it comes to their emotions, they have a lot of emotional awareness and things like that. A lot more emotional awareness than ESTPs. ESTPs are not necessarily that emotionally aware as far when it comes to their own emotions um, compared to the ESFP. Now, also another like a observable difference. ESTPs almost always are going to look more intimidating on the surface. ESTPs look intimidating. They got this look to them where they look like they could just bite your head off type of look. They got an aggressive sort of presence and they come off way more intense than ESFPs do. Now, on the other hand, ESFPs do not like they typically don't necessarily come off. They can come off maybe intense, but not in an intimidating way. They have a softer feel. Like their vibe is a lot softer than ESTP. Um, ESTPs almost always got like a more aggressive, intense, and it can be overpowering in a way. Now, the thing is, like as they get older, they learn how to drop that intensity level down quite a lot. But like a lot of times ESTPs have this thing where they can be too intense for a lot of people and almost in a way to where it's like, like that cousin that's a little heavy handed, like when you play fight with them, they hit a little too hard, but they can't help it. That type of thing. That's an ESTP for you. Like they could be a little too intense physically. Um, they can come off very aggressive too and things like that without them trying. Now when they get older, they do tend to learn how to scale that back a lot. The older, like a good example of that, there's this girl. She's like a streamer. Her name is Zoa. She's an ESTP. I've observed her. She's known for being like really loud and like just too much for a lot of people. She's an ESTP. Um, that's a prime example. ESFPs, on the other hand, they more like they have more people. They might have a little more people skills than ESTP. ESTPs have good people skills as well, but ESFPs are way more approachable. That's a big way to tell the difference. That's the same. That goes the same for ISFPs and ISTPs too. My type. ISFPs are a little more approachable than my type is. My type, we're approachable, but at the same time, we give off this like look like don't bother me look without trying. ISFPs are just like they have a very approachable look demeanor to them, even though they're quiet, which is kind of interesting. I've always admired that. But yeah, that's the main difference too. ESFPs almost always gonna be looking more approachable than the ESTP. ESTP, they going I'm not saying they're not approachable, but it's like they give off this aggressive presence, like intense presence. Now the thing is, both types, they have the ability to go to the same level of intensity. But the thing is, ESFPs just don't. They just come off a lot more laid back initially. Let's say like in sports where it's intense environment, ESFP can go to that level just like an ESTP can. They both are really intense. They're both on the same level of intensity. It's just that ESTPs, for some reason, on the surface, they just look more. I don't know. I think it's just got something to do with the introverted thinking versus introverted feeling. Introverted thinking is more of a serious. Well, I almost want to say introverted thinking is a serious function, but it's more so like introverted thinking is very just. I don't know. Introverted feeling is it has a softer feel to it. You know what I'm saying? Like a softer, more um, yeah, softer feel to it when it's paired with something like SE. It just does. But yeah, also too, sometimes people think like because when ESFP uses tertiary TE, sometimes they confuse that with them being thinkers. The thing is, people got to realize introverted feelers, a lot of them consider themselves to be logical people. Introverted feeling is not necessarily always super emotional function, even though it is called introverted feeling and it's dealing with emotions. Sometimes they can be very like logical in a way. It's not the same as introverted thinking or extroverted thinking, but it's almost like they process all of their emotions very deeply and they go through it all. The process happens internally. They get to the point to where they run out of um so they went through all of that, so all they got left is logic. In a way, it's weird. It's not. I won't even call it logic almost, but they can consider themselves logical. Some of that could be their inferior TE overwhelming them too, though. That's what it is. Part of it is that, but also just FI. FI is in a way is logical. It's very hard to describe honestly right now, but I'm saying like introverted feeling in a way it makes decisions that are rational. It has a rationale about it in a way, even though it is an emotional function too. There's a rationale to it as well, which sounds a little confusing, but it's true. You know, um, now ESTPs on the other hand, they got the extroverted feeling. So like I said, for them, a lot of times they can vent a lot. They can talk about how they feel about things, but it's more like in an expressive way. Like to them, it's just like them being real. You know what I'm saying? But they're still a lot of times people see that and they think, oh, that's a filler, that's an ESFP. You know what I'm saying? But yeah, this is just things that people tend to overlook. I probably got some more, but that's just what I can think of right now. Maybe I'll go into this later. But anyways, yeah. Um, Yeah, there's just two things like the douchebag stereotype. ESTPs can be seen as those douchebags. Like I'm talking about the flashy, "ooh, look at my car" um, stereotype. They'll lean into that because they don't mind being viewed like that. ESFPs on the other hand, they're not going to necessarily lean into that stereotype. If you see somebody leaning into that stereotype, most of the time that's an ESTP. ESTPs are going to lean into that. Look at my car. "Ooh, I got the nice sunglasses. Ooh, I'm fitting all the stereotypes of being a flashy kind of guy." You know, I get all the girls. Like that's an ESTP, bro. ESTPs, they can fit that, but they're not like leaning into it and broadcasting themselves to be that way necessarily. It's more like a thing like introverted feeling is authenticity. It values authenticity. So like they're not necessarily going to force something like that if it doesn't feel natural to them. ESTPs, I'm not saying they're being inauthentic by doing that, but they'll lean into it. They don't mind leaning into it. They don't mind being seen like that. You know what I'm saying? A lot of times. So that's why I say it's not necessarily a bad thing because it's more like being viewed that way versus actually being that way. ECPs do have a lot more substance when you get to know them, but sometimes they'll lean into that and they don't mind it. Like it's not doesn't mean that they are always that shallow. There's a lot more to them other than that, but they don't mind being that way or enjoying that type of lifestyle if they can, if they got money for real. But of course, we don't always got the money to do that, but like they'll lean into it in other smaller ways because most people aren't rich, of course. But even on smaller scales, they'll lean into that. But yeah, just know that most of the time, if you see somebody leaning into being like the douchebag, "ooh, I get all the girls," "ooh, look at my sunglasses" type of thing, most of the time that's going to be ESTP. Now, if you see somebody leaning more into um, So the other, I say the equivalency to that, actually a better equivalency, I say ESFP will lean into, oh, I'm just nothing's that serious. They lean into like maybe not taking life so serious and just being like go with the flow with everything. And like, they might lean into being like the party girl, even though that's not always, that's too much of a stereotype though, because a lot of ESFPs don't necessarily like the party either, but they can maybe lean into being a party animal, don't take nothing serious, just doing stuff for fun. They can kind of do risky things for fun, but like I said, they're not gonna lean into the douchebag. Look, I got all the money type of thing. I don't think they care about money as much as ESTP. ESTPs, I think, care more about money than ESTPs a lot of times. ESTPs tend to be rich too. Like I think, like I said, I made a tier list talking about who's gonna be the richest, who will be the richest. ESTPs are S tier as far as that. A lot of the richest people in the world are ESTPs. But yeah. Uh, anyways, think I'm just trying to make sure I said everything I want to say for right now. But anyways, thanks for watching.